Security, privacy, and ethics. Service recipients place a certain amount of trust in service providers when sharing their information. Confidential information is assumed to be kept private and secure. It is also assumed that information collected is limited to that which is necessary to meet requirements for reporting and service provision. All agencies must verify that any computer that an agency staff person uses to access the system meets the minimum security requirement agreed to in the Memorandum of Understanding and Policies and Procedures Manual. These include a firewall on any network and virus scanning software that updates automatically and is set to run at least once per week. In addition, most information collected in HMIS is classified as Protected Personal Information or PPI by HUD. PPI is any information that might identify a specific individual or that might be manipulated or linked with any other information to identify a specific individual. Recipients trust that providers will not speak about their cases to anyone in a manner that will identify them to that person or agency without their consent. Please note that data in aggregate form without the ability to identify specific individuals or families may be shared between agencies without specific consent from individual clients. It is also important to note that any client may refuse to share a particular piece of information, and as long as that information is not a factor in determining eligibility for a particular program or service, that a client may not be refused service. For example, HUD requires that veteran status is collected for all persons 18 and over. A client may refuse to share that information unless the particular program to which they are applying is limited to veterans only. Veteran status is then a part of the determining eligibility. Any person seeking access to HMIS must sign an agreement that he or she will protect the information within it before access is granted. Failure to do so will result in a minimum loss of access to HMIS. If loss of access prevents a service provider from performing his or her job, loss of employment may follow. Additionally, depending on the nature and severity of the failure, criminal prosecution may be pursued with the possibility of fines and jail time. Users may never share their login information with anyone. If a person needs access to HMIS, that person must receive official HMIS training and sign a user agreement in order for access to be granted. A user's login information is that user's responsibility. If a user believes that someone else has discovered his or her password, it is that user's responsibility to immediately notify HMIS staff. Passwords must meet a minimum security requirement. HUD requirements are that passwords be at least 8 characters in length, contain a mix of numbers and letters or special characters, and not be based on common words or names or program names. Login information may not be stored in any publicly accessible location. In addition, passwords must be changed by the user every 45 days to prevent lockout. Information may be shared with other agencies only in aggregate form or when specifically authorized to do so by a client's valid release of information. Any such sharing of information must be logged and tracked and made available to the client when requested. Users are responsible for knowledge of and conformity with any more stringent requirements delineated by their organization or laws that apply to their organization. Intake workers are responsible for notifying clients of how PPI will be used, as well as under what circumstances with whom it will be shared. Including a client's information in HMIS requires consent for 3 levels of activities and sharing. A client must consent to allow their information to be used within an agency for that agency's operations. A client must consent to allow their personal identifying information to be shared across agencies in the HMIS to aid in deduplication efforts. Finally, a client must consent to share additional information across programs to aid in service coordination and case management. A client may opt out at any level. HUD allows organizations that provide homelessness services to select what sort of consent they require to track and share client information, as long as they meet whatever minimum is set by the local continuum of care or lead agency. In Dallas and Collin counties, inferred consent is all that is required to include a client's information in HMIS or share with other agencies within HMIS. As long as a privacy policy is available and a sign, including general reasons for data collection and a reference to the privacy policy, is posted at each location within an organization that intake is conducted, inferred consent is allowed. This means that unless a client specifies that he or she does not want information included in HMIS or shared with other HMIS agencies, consent can be assumed. Both the privacy policy and the sign are available by the service request as discussed in the Help Desk Tools section of this manual. Agencies may set more stringent consent requirements. Agencies may require implied or informed consent in which a client must affirmatively agree to share their information and indicate comprehension. An agency may also require written consent for which a client must sign a release of information. It is the responsibility of the intake worker and the HMIS user to know what level of consent is required at their agency and whether or not a given has agreed. If a client opts out of either interagency sharing, it is the user's responsibility to set the sharing level in HMIS. If a client opts out of allowing his or her data to be included in HMIS at all, the client's information may not be included in HMIS in any way, real or fake. This data must be tracked separately by each agency through supplemental means. It is the agency's responsibility to ensure this information is included in reports.